NATO expansion is the reason why Russia openly invaded Ukraine in 2022. That is what the propaganda spread by the Kremlin is trying to persuade us of. But let's find out the truth. Russian propaganda is trying to persuade Western audiences that NATO has been a threat to the country's national security. The Kremlin is trying to promote the idea that expanding eastwards, the military bloc has betrayed the 1990 agreement they struck with the USSR, promising not to expand beyond the territory of East Germany. This is a widespread myth, as the agreement doesn't exist, and NATO has maintained an open-door policy for new members since its establishment in 1949, and this policy remains unchanged. What's important to understand is back then a lot of countries in Europe were still part of the Eastern Bloc, like the Warsaw Pact. So that alleged promise seemed to make sense, as no one could have predicted the collapse of the Soviet Union, but in 1991 things changed dramatically. The Warsaw Pact was officially dissolved, and then a chain of events rearranged the security configuration in Europe. So saying that NATO failed any sort of agreement with Russia is simply wrong. In addition, the Russians forget that in 1997 they signed a document called the NATO-Russia Founding Act, through which they would become partners with the alliance. They also forget to mention now that they committed to guaranteeing peace and security in the Euro-Atlantic area, as well as the territorial integrity of all member states. NATO has always insisted on two things. The first is that they are a defensive alliance, and the second is that they will pursue their open-door policy to guarantee security in the Transatlantic region. NATO enlargement would always spark debate among its own member states, with some thinking it would deteriorate the bloc's defense capability and others claiming otherwise. But when NATO realized Russia was posing a real threat, in June 2022 the alliance changed its strategy, where Moscow was no more considered as a partner but as a threat to the security architecture of Europe. Russia tends to use the narrative that it is defending itself against Ukrainian Nazis and NATO in order to legitimize its actions to its own citizens. Russia employs a propaganda technique known as playing the victim, intended to cultivate a strong desire for retribution against those perceived as the aggressors.